Hey friends, you know that Cloud Shell is one of my favorite features in Azure, and now it got even better. Justin Luck is here to show me the new Cloud Shell editor, which is based on Monaco, the open source text editor. We're learning all about it today on Azure Friday. Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman, and it's another episode of Azure Friday. I'm here with my buddy Justin Luck, going to talk to me about one of my favorite things in the world, which is shell.azure.com, the Azure Cloud Shell. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Scott?
I'm living the dream, my friend.
Every day.
Living the dream every day here at the Microsoft. I'm finding myself typing shell.azure.com more often.
That's fantastic.
Than portal.azure.com. Now, it's not a competition.
No, it's not.
But it's pretty cool. Now, I can get the shell in the portal by just clicking that button up at the top, and I get a split screen. We have the portal on top and the shell at the bottom. But for the command line amongst us, it's kind of nice to be able to pick Bash or PowerShell, and you're making it even cooler now with a new preview feature.
Yes, exactly. So just like you said, for those who want to go straight into a command line and they're power users with Azure CLI 2.0 or PowerShell, it's a great place to go if you're not looking for a UI. But now, with the integration of the new editor feature, we're able to streamline some of that text editing that you'd normally need to do for complicated configurations. So maybe you need to deploy an ARM template and edit some JSON. Maybe you use Terraform or some of these other open source tools integrated into Cloud Shell. And so we want to make sure that anyone who's not a Vim pro like you can come in here and easily and seamlessly transition in and out of file editing into deployment through an authenticated terminal.
Yeah, I've had some problems where I've had to shut down the entire Azure cloud just because I couldn't exit Vim.
I don't blame you.
It's a huge problem.
It's difficult.
But seriously though, you have to edit like your YAML files if you're doing some things with Kubernetes and AKS.
Exactly.
Even simple stuff like doing a .bash profile. Again, if you're not a Vim or Emacs person, you're going to go into Pico or Nano. Mm-hmm. Maybe I could do something else.
Yeah, exactly. So just like you said, there's a lot of different file formats. So I actually have a couple of YAML formats for deployment to Azure Container Instances, just like for Kubernetes that you referenced. So if we head into here, you'll see if I cat this liveness.yaml file, it's a decent sized file. It's pretty small, but it's hard if I don't know how to use Vim very easily. So now instead I can just simply type code, and then if I add in this dot, that's going to open up this embedded editor that is going to default to the directory that is in my terminal. So here you see, if I ls in here one more time, you'll see these three files, and those are the ones that you see here. And so I have this file explorer that's on the side. This is custom integration that we've done on top of embedding this Monaco project.
Now, Monaco is the open source editor, the text editor, the JavaScript, CSS, and HTML that does this here. It's not Visual Studio Code, but it's like it powers the text editing part of Visual Studio Code.
Exactly. And so Monaco is an open source project, so you can head over to GitHub and check it out. And there's a great FAQ in here that kind of explains what Monaco is, what its origins were, and it's some of the really great goodness that powers VS Code, like you just said. And it has some shims wrapped around it so that it can render itself within a browser. And so this is simply what we've ported into Cloud Shell with some help from our friends within Microsoft.
I see. And then when I type code and then dot, where dot equals the current directory, or code and the name of the file itself.
Exactly.
I'm not really running VS Code, but I'm used to typing code dot, so it's an intuitive experience, even though it's a limited one inside of the Cloud Shell.
Exactly. And so that's an important note in that we're not looking to provide this end-to-end, full feature-rich editor that you're able to get through VS Code, but we do want to provide a strong utility, just like Cloud Shell. In the terminal, we're not looking to replace your local terminal or command line. We want to just enable a strong, simple utility that can be accessed from any browser. And so this is the next step for us, to make sure that your file editing is super easy from any browser, but not a full-fledged area where you might do your day-to-day coding.
I see. So I'm not going to go in here and write a full application from scratch on a Chromebook or on an iPad.
Right.
This is just for doing configuration. But I can still do real work.
Yes, you could definitely still do real work. And then the great part there is that we still have the Cloud Shell extension through the Azure account extension in VS Code. And so that is actually something you can install within local VS Code if you want to port files back and forth to your backing cloud drive. And then that can seamlessly transition in and out from local to your browser.
That's a really good point. Being able to log in to shell.azure.com and see a lightweight text editor is one thing, but I could also just download and run VS Code and then open an Azure Cloud Shell, which is still powered by you and your team.
Exactly.
And it'll appear at the bottom, so I can have PowerShell, Command, Bash, or Azure Cloud Shell all in my VS Code. So I can invert this.
Exactly. Yeah, so part of this, the nicety here is it's modular. So this Monaco application that you see in here is actually just rendered as an HTML element within this iframe right next to the terminal, which is also built on the open source project Xterm.js.
Nice.
Which also powers the terminal within VS Code.
This is good. This is a lot of open source.
Yeah, it's awesome. Overall, across Azure, we're seeing more and more of the ease and simplicity around managing cloud infrastructure, and that really comes through some of these open source tools like Terraform, Ansible, Chef, Xterm, Monaco, and these are all things that we want to make sure are easily at your fingertips.
So you mentioned Terraform and Chef. Can you do something with them in the remaining few minutes?
Yeah, so I do have a Terraform file that we can mess around with. So let's actually hop out of the editor so that I can find where I've put this.
I appreciate your large fonts as well. Thank you for that.
Of course, anytime. And so if I go into my Terraform, here's one. So I can do a quick Terraform init just to check that I have the right version of the Azure provider.
Was Terraform already installed in the Cloud Shell?
Yes, sir. Terraform is already here, and it is actually able to look at the authentication that we provide automatically, so you actually don't have to do an additional login through a service principal.
So I didn't have to tell it about Azure. I'm in Azure.
Exactly.
Very cool.
And so if I do a code dot in here, we can check out this main.tf file. And in here is a quick configuration where I'm going to deploy a container that is actually just going to draw ASCII art of Clippy within Slack when I ask it to. It's really, really cutting edge stuff. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and do a Terraform plan. And I'll hop out of here real quick. And so here, we'll see that I actually have this container deployed, so that's going to save us a little bit of time. So I can actually come in here and go ahead and throw on Slack so that we can test this out. And so here I have just a private channel so that I don't bother other people. So I'm going to say Clippy draw hello Scott. And so there's some great ASCII art saying hello to my best friend Scott. Mm-hmm. And so this is just simply running on a container within Azure Container Instances, and I deployed that directly from Cloud Shell using Terraform. And so now that I don't really need it anymore, I can do a Terraform destroy if I need to. And this is simply going to look at what's in my state file, acknowledge that it still exists, and then it's going to ask me if I actually want to destroy it, in which case I do. And so we'll go ahead and walk through this, and it's going to delete those two resources.
If I were going to do this locally on my own Bash shell or my own term in Mac, I'd need to do what kinds of setup ahead of time? Because the convenience of being already logged into the Azure CLI, already being set up with a certain subscription, can't really be overstated. I'd have to do a non-trivial amount of setup on my local machine. I'd have to set up Terraform. What else? Yeah,
so you'd have to set up Terraform. You'd have to set up a service principal and basically authenticate that service principal to be called through Terraform. Terraform, I don't believe has a huge list of dependencies, but you'd have to make sure that those are there as well. If you needed to do anything that wasn't supported by the Azure provider, you'd probably want to use the CLI too. Mm-hmm. And so you'd need to install that. That has a dependency on Python, so you'd have to make sure Python is in there appropriately. As well as every time you logged into the CLI, you'd have to make sure that you're authenticated for the session that you're about to have. And so that's when you do the AZ login, go in through the website and copy paste the code. But here, you don't have to do that because you are within the context of Azure, within your profile inside of the Azure portal.
And all of this is done for us. You've set it up, and you roam it. It's everywhere. And all any configurations that I would set up get roamed into my into this folder here. So tilde is in my storage and roamed.
That is correct. So if I do a quick ls in here, you'll see that I have a couple of custom files that I carry around with me. Mm-hmm. And so everything within tilde or home is actually persisted within Bash because we have a 5 gigabyte user image that's stored inside of your file share that you set up whenever you launch Cloud Shell for the first time.
Nice.
Yeah, and so this makes sure that whatever scripts that I write, I can actually have a draft, come back later, throw up the editor, make some edits, deploy it directly from the terminal, and then I'll have access to that anywhere the Cloud Shell is available. So either through the Azure mobile app, VS Code's extension, the browser, shell.azure, portal.azure. It's a really great way to make sure that you're always productive if you can squeeze out like 5 or 10 minutes in between.
This might be a silly question or might be a little bit more of an advanced question, but can I install other developer tools in Cloud Shell, or is Cloud Shell meant to be like my VM in the cloud? Because it isn't really. It's not a development place, but I could always go and spin up my own Ubuntu ACI instance. Like, when do I outgrow Cloud Shell and use it as a jumping off point to SSH into a full VM or into a development container?
That's a great question. So today, Cloud Shell doesn't support sudo installs. And
well, there you go. There's my answer.
That's a pretty good line in the sand. So if you need something that has to have these super user permissions, or if you need to set up things that exist on the VM layer. So since Cloud Shell is hosted in a container, there's certain things that aren't supported today. So today you can't run like interact with the Docker socket, but you could on a VM that you own totally from the ground up. And so at least in the current limitation and scope, that's a good line to delineate when you need a full-fledged dev machine that you curate on your own, versus just coming in and using the ease of Cloud Shell. But in the future, I do foresee that those gaps getting closed, but that's a great question.
Yeah, so there's no reason I couldn't, since I'm already logged into AZ, to say AZ VM create, make an Ubuntu machine or whatever machine that makes me happy, set up the SSH keys and store them in my Cloud Shell, so I could Cloud Shell in, SSH into dev, and I'm off and running on a machine that I run and I build regularly.
Yep, exactly. Whenever you handle any type of secrets, though, within Cloud Shell, it's definitely recommended that you use the best practices there, like storing things in Key Vault if they have application in there, and referencing through there.
Okay. That's a good point, rather than putting my SSH keys in Cloud Shell storage directly.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So this is in preview, and as of the time that people are watching this video, they can use this and play with it.
Yes, so it's super easy to try and kick it around. It is a brand new feature, and so you can come into any Azure Cloud Shell experience within the browser, simply type code, and then you can reference a specific file if you want. So here we could do Docker, and that's going to pull up the exact file that you want to edit.
And where would they give feedback if they have thoughts about this?
Great question. So aka.ms/cloudshell/feedback is a great place to let the engineering team know about any missing features or issues that you're having. We look at it very often, so we look forward to hearing from everyone.
Fantastic. I am learning all about the Azure Cloud Shell editor now in preview here on Azure Friday.